we're going to solder a couple of pieces together in preparation for the Mr. Shepker workshop, the Hans Shepker glass geometry workshop. Now the first thing I'm doing is I'm looking for the smooth side. Glass is made on a flat surface. One side will be smooth, that's the side that was made against the flat surface, and the other side often has ripples. We want to make sure in our work that we're keeping all of the smooth sides facing the same direction. So I'm going to start with my smooth side up. Easier to tell on this rippled piece than it is on this smooth piece, but we're going to do the best we can. So I'm going to assemble a configuration for a net, for a cube, and I want the lids to be white. So I want parallel faces to be white. Plus I want it to look interesting while it's flat. So I think this is the configuration I'm going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and just line them up. And my first step is kind of like stitching. I'm just going to stitch the glass pieces together. And I want all the ridges or the waves on the glass to kind of face the same direction. So I'm happy with the way this is sitting. So I'm going to go ahead and tack it together with the solder. We have flux here. Flux is an acid that is designed to remove any impurities from the glass. Now, it's not something you need a lot of. I'm simply going to put a dot in 2 places at every seam that I want to connect. And I don't put the brush back in the solder, I just lay it across the container. Now that flux is preparing the surface so that the solder will stick to it. Now the solder, I'm just going to pick up a little bit by melting it onto the edge with the hot soldering iron, and I'm going to just touch that spot, and that's now tacked together in those 2 places. And that's all I'm aiming to do right now. And I'm going to tack a few more spots together, and then we'll work on smoothing the seams out. It's really important that you flux before you solder. Flux is what makes the solder flow and have this nice fluid-like surface. So if you notice that your neighbor is not fluxing before they solder, just remind them that they should be fluxing. There is such a thing as too much flux. You don't want big pools of it. Do you hear that steam? That's probably too much flux right there. Now at this point I'm going to put the iron down. So I'm going to wipe off the end on this wet sponge. If you're at a workstation that has a sponge that's dry, you're going to want to wet that sponge. And then the soldering gun is very, very hot, so we never touch more than just the black handle, and the soldering stand holds it. At this point, this work is completely attached, although it isn't structurally sound just yet. But now, I don't have to worry about the pieces coming apart. I'm going to lightly brush solder on those 4 seams. And the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of smooth out the solder that's already there by bringing the flat blade of the soldering iron over the lump of solder. Again, this is a product that we could use as little as possible in order to minimize any waste we create. Anywhere I have gaps after smoothing out the existing solder is a place where I will go back over the work and add a little more solder. So I've got gaps on just about all of my edges here, so we use solder and iron together to just continue that action of moving the solder along the seam. When we work on the chandelier project, Mr. Shepker will have the work in a jig, which will hold the correct angle in place as you work on the product. Now, the solder piece is hot, the glass piece is not. You can touch the glass. At this point, you cannot touch the solder. So the important pieces you need to remember about the soldering process: don't touch the tip, don't touch the handle past the black. Insulated pieces, always use flux. If you notice that your solder is not melting smoothly, you can try to flux again and try to minimize the waste as you work. Something interesting is happening over here. Not sure exactly what it was. So we just have a little bit of a gap to fill in over here. Those are the basics of soldering. Mrs. Richardson, can you think of anything I forgot?
No, I think you got everything.
What would you like students mostly to remember? Oh, I know what we need students
Let's
mostly
talk
to
about
remember.
these little treasures, that why these are not, why it's important not to take little beads of solder.
Yes, we do not remove any material, mostly because we can continue to reuse this. So don't take any material out of the workshop area. The soldering iron will pick this up and allow you to what is called silver the edges or spread it around. These soldering irons are on loan from Mr. Shepker, so we need to keep them very clean. We will wipe them before you put them down. We will wipe them before they get turned off. All of the materials we're using today and during the workshop are a gift from not a gift, are on loan from Mr. Shepker. I'm just going to wet this sponge. And he puts them in his car and brings them across country to us. So we want to respect these materials, and we want to respect Mr. Shepker's time. So when you arrive at the workshop on Tuesday, you'll be ready to work.